September 19th, 1980. A patch of woods on Staten Island, New York. The van doors swing open. A 69-year-old man steps out into the dirt. No blindfold, no restraints. He already knows. He's been riding with his killers for 13 hours, talking, laughing, telling stories about the old days. Now it's over. Johnny Keys. Simone bends down, unties his shoes, and pulls them off. He sets them neatly beside the van. He straightens up, looks at the man holding the gun, doesn't flinch, doesn't beg. He lowers his head, takes 2 steps forward, and says 4 words. "Let me die like a man." 1 bullet to the back of the head, then 2 more after he hit the ground. Johnny Keys Simone was dead before his body settled in the leaves. He died without a sound. He died on his own terms. And the shoes he left behind told his wife the only thing he wanted her to know. This wasn't just another mob hit. Johnny Keys was one of the most feared men in the Philadelphia crime family. A captain who ran Trenton, New Jersey, like his own private kingdom. The cousin of Angelo Bruno, the boss of the entire organization. A man who, by some accounts, had carried out between 40 and 50 murders in his lifetime. When you've killed that many people, you understand the mechanics of death better than most. You know when it's your turn, and Johnny Keys knew. This is the story of how the assassination of one quiet Philadelphia boss triggered a chain of bloodshed that consumed an entire crime family. How an old-school Sicilian mobster saw his own death coming for months and chose to face it with a dignity that haunted his killer for decades. This is the rise, the reign, and the final walk of Johnny Keys Simone. But here's what most people miss about this story. The man who pulled the trigger didn't want to do it. Sammy the Bull Gravano, the future underboss of the Gambino family, spent 13 hours in a van with Johnny Keys. And by the time they reached those woods, Gravano didn't just respect him. He loved him. That's what makes this hit different from every other mob execution. The killer wept for the man he killed. You have to understand what Philadelphia looked like in the late 1970s to understand how Johnny Keys ended up in that van. For over 20 years, the Philadelphia crime family had been one of the most stable operations in the American Mafia, and the reason was one man, Angelo Bruno. They called him the Gentle Don, the Docile Don. Bruno ran the family the way a CEO runs a corporation. Minimal violence, maximum profit. He had gambling, loan sharking, and labor union rackets stretching across Pennsylvania and New Jersey. He sat on the National Commission, the Mafia's ruling body, and his closest ally was the most powerful Don in New York, Carlo Gambino himself. Bruno was born Angelo Annaloro in Villalba, Sicily, in 1910. He came to America during Prohibition and climbed through the ranks of the Philly underworld with patience and political skill. When the former boss tried to have him killed, Bruno didn't retaliate with violence. He went to Carlo Gambino, got the commission to intervene, and took the throne without spilling a drop of blood. Then he let the man who tried to kill him live, just demoted him to soldier. That's how Bruno operated. Smart, measured, controlled, and living right there in Bruno's orbit was his cousin, Johnny Keys. Simone grew up in the life. By the time he was a young man in Trenton, he was already connected. The Trenton operation was an extension of the Philadelphia family, and Johnny Keys was the man who ran it. He was a Kappa regime, a captain. He controlled gambling, loan sharking, and enforcement across the Trenton area for decades. But what made Johnny Keys different from most captains was his reputation for violence. This was not a man who delegated the rough stuff. When a problem needed to be solved permanently, Johnny Keys was the one who solved it, between 40 and 50 times over his career, if you believe the estimates. He was old school, Sicilian to his core. He believed in the rules. He believed in loyalty. He believed in Cosa Nostra, the way a priest believes in the church. And that belief would be the thing that got him killed. For years, Everything ran smooth under Bruno. The money flowed. The families were fed. Nobody drew unnecessary heat. But by the late 70s, cracks were forming. The problem was Atlantic City. When gambling became legal in New Jersey in 1977, it opened up a gold mine sitting right in Bruno's backyard. His men expected him to seize it aggressively. Instead, Bruno played diplomat. He welcomed other crime families in. He shared the territory, and some of his key people resented him for it. One of those people was his own consigliere, Antonio "Tony Bananas" Caponigro, a sociopath based in Newark. Caponigro wanted to expand into narcotics. Bruno had publicly banned drug dealing within the family, even though privately, certain members were allowed to traffic with his quiet approval. That double standard ate at Caponigro. He wanted Bruno gone. He wanted the throne. In late 1979, Caponigro started plotting a coup. He approached Frank Funzi Thierry, the Genovese boss, believing he could get commission approval to take out Bruno. The accounts vary on whether Thierry actually gave him the green light or simply didn't stop him. What's documented is what happened next. March 21st, 1980, South Philadelphia. Angelo Bruno had just finished dinner at his favorite Italian restaurant. His bodyguard, John Stanfa, drove him home. Bruno sat in the passenger seat of Stanfa's car outside his row house, smoking a cigarette. Someone crept up behind the vehicle with a shotgun, put it behind Bruno's right ear, and pulled the trigger. The gentle Don was dead at 69 years old, 21 years of stability, erased in 1 second. The commission was furious. Killing a boss without authorization was the ultimate violation. Within weeks, Tony Bananas Caponigro was summoned to New York. He thought he was going to be crowned the new boss of Philadelphia. Instead, he was tortured. His body was found in the trunk of a car in the Bronx, stabbed repeatedly, with $300 bills stuffed in various orifices of his body. A message: you don't profit from killing a boss. His brother-in-law, Alfred Salerno, was found the same way. But the commission wasn't done. The men who had backed Caponigro, who had been seen as sympathizers or potential challengers to the new order, they all had targets on their backs. And one of those names was Johnny Keys Simone. Here's where it gets complicated. Some accounts say Johnny Keys was directly involved in the plot to kill Bruno, that he was one of Caponigro's co-conspirators. Other sources, including Sammy Gravano's own account, tell a different story. Gravano said that after Bruno's death, Johnny Keys began talking to Gambino family overseers about his own prospects for taking over the Philadelphia family. He was Bruno's cousin. He had the blood. He had the respect. And he thought he had a legitimate claim. The commission had already decided who would run Philadelphia. Philip, the chicken man tester, Bruno's former underboss, was installed as the new boss. And waiting in the wings behind Tester was Nicodemo, Little Nicky Scarfo. Scarfo didn't trust Johnny Keys, not one bit. He saw an old-school captain with deep loyalties to the Bruno regime and connections to the Gambino family that could undermine his own position. Scarfo went to the commission and told them Simone had to go. The commission agreed. The contract was handed down from the top. Paul Castellano, the Gambino boss, gave the order directly. You know what the FBI didn't see coming? The hit on Johnny Keys wasn't going to be carried out by Philadelphia guys. It was outsourced. Castellano assigned it to one of his own, a young, ambitious soldier in the Gambino family named Salvatore Gravano, Sammy the Bull. At that point, Gravano was still building his reputation. He wasn't the underboss yet. He wasn't even a capo. But Castellano saw something in him. So, when he needed Johnny Keys handled, he looked across the room during a meeting with another Gambino member and said it plainly. "Sammy, could you get this done?" Gravano put together a plan. The key was getting close to Johnny Keys without raising suspicion. You couldn't just walk up to a man who'd killed 50 people and expect him not to smell danger. So Gravano crafted a ruse. He had word sent to Johnny Keys through intermediaries that a young Gambino associate named Sammy wanted to meet him. The message described Gravano as a punk, a nobody, a jerk-off that Castellano was sending to pay his respects. Johnny Keys wouldn't see a threat. He'd see an errand boy. The meeting was set at the Skyview Country Club in Washington Township, New Jersey, an upscale spot near the airport. Johnny Keys showed up with no security concerns. Why would he? This was a Gambino guy coming to kiss the ring. They walked the grounds together. Gravano, Johnny Keys, Nicky Russo, a Trenton capo connected to the Gambinos, Joe Farinella. It looked like a friendly afternoon stroll. Then Johnny Keys noticed a van, engine running, side doors slightly open. Gravano grabbed him. The doors flew wide. Hands reached out and pulled Johnny Keys inside. Liborio Louis Milito, a Gambino soldier and one of Gravano's closest partners, was waiting. They bound him, gagged him, and began the 75-mile drive to Staten Island. But here's where this story becomes something more than a mob hit. Because what happened in that van over the next 13 hours changed Sammy Gravano. Johnny Keys knew immediately what was happening. He was 69 years old. He had spent a lifetime on the other end of situations exactly like this one. He didn't panic. He didn't scream. He didn't beg. He started talking. For 13 hours, Johnny Keys Simone sat in the back of that van with the men who were going to kill him, and he talked about his life. He told stories about the old days, about Angelo Bruno, about what it meant to be a man in this thing of theirs. He asked Gravano about his own life, his crew, his ambitions, and somewhere during those 13 hours, something shifted. Gravano later said it was breaking his heart. He didn't want to kill this man. He had started the day executing a commission order. Now he was sitting across from a man he genuinely admired, a man he would later call the epitome of our life. At one point during the drive, Johnny Keys grabbed his chest. His breathing went shallow. He was having a heart seizure. The old man looked at Gravano and asked him to reach into his pocket and pull out a nitroglycerin pill to put it under his tongue. Gravano hesitated. He thought to himself, wouldn't it be easier for everyone if Johnny Keys just died of a heart attack right here in this van? But he didn't say that. He reached into the old man's pocket, found the pill, and placed it under his tongue. Think about that for a second. A man on his way to be executed is having a heart attack. His body is offering him a way out, a natural death, no bullet, no blood, and he refuses it. He wants the pill. He wants to stay alive long enough to be shot. Because in his mind, dying of a heart attack in the back of a van isn't dying like a man, dying by the gun. That's Cosa Nostra. When the van finally stopped in those Staten Island woods, Johnny Keys made 2 requests. The first was about his shoes. He told Gravano that his wife read the papers. She knew what world he lived in. And he had always told her, "Relax, I'll die at home with my shoes off. Don't worry about it." He explained that if his body was found without shoes, his wife would know. She would know that in his last moments, he was thinking about her. That was his final message to the woman he loved. Not spoken, not written. Delivered through the absence of a pair of shoes on a dead man's feet. The second request was simple. Let me die like a man. He didn't want to be shot in the van. He wanted to walk out on his own 2 feet. Gravano agreed. He removed Johnny Keys' shoes himself. Then he opened the van doors. Johnny Keys stepped out into the dirt, barefoot. He looked at Gravano. He said, "Sammy, I love you." Then he took 2 steps forward, lowered his head. Quiet, dignified. Louis Milito raised the gun. 1 shot to the back of the head. Johnny Keys Simone dropped to the ground instantly. Milito fired twice more. It was over. Gravano stood there in those woods and felt something he didn't expect. Shame. He went back to Paul Castellano and reported the hit was done, but he couldn't let it go. He told Castellano, "I feel dirty. I took out somebody who was the epitome of our life, someone I'm supposed to look up to, and I killed him." Castellano's response was cold, practical. The work needed to be done. But for Gravano, the memory of Johnny Keys never faded. Years later, when he was cooperating with the FBI and had admitted to 19 murders, the killing of Johnny Keys was the one that still made him emotional. He would say publicly that Johnny Keys taught him how to die. The death of Johnny Keys Simone didn't end the bloodshed in Philadelphia. It was only the beginning. Philip Testa, the man the commission installed as Bruno's successor, lasted less than a year. On March 15, 1981, a nail bomb detonated under his front porch. Testa was killed instantly. Then Nicky Scarfo seized the throne, and what followed was the most violent decade in the history of the Philadelphia Mafia. Over 30 murders. The Scarfo-Riccobene War. Made men killing made men. The FBI watching it all, building RICO cases that would eventually bring the whole structure crashing down. By 1988, Scarfo and most of his top allies were convicted and sentenced to long prison terms. Frank Barracuda Sindone, another man accused of involvement in Bruno's killing, was murdered just 2 months after Johnny Keys, shot to death and stuffed into a bag, found on a Philadelphia street. The commission was systematic about it. Everyone connected to the Bruno assassination, real or suspected, was eliminated. As for Sammy Gravano, the man who organized Johnny Keys's death, his own story took a path nobody predicted. He rose to underboss of the Gambino family under John Gotti. Then, in 1991, after hearing Gotti trash-talk him on FBI surveillance tapes, Gravano flipped. He became the highest-ranking member of the American Mafia to ever cooperate with the federal government. His testimony put John Gotti away for life. He served a short prison sentence, entered witness protection, and eventually settled in Arizona. The man who killed 19 people walked free. Nobody was ever charged with the murder of Johnny Keys Simone until Gravano started talking to the feds in 1992. For 12 years, the case sat open. Everyone in law enforcement knew who did it. Nobody could prove it. That's how the Mafia worked in those days. No one talked. Johnny Keys Simone spent a lifetime inside Cosa Nostra. He rose from the streets of Trenton to become one of the most feared captains on the East Coast. He killed for the family, he earned for the family, and when the family decided he had to go, he didn't run. He didn't hide. He took a nitroglycerin pill so his heart wouldn't rob him of a proper death. He removed his shoes so his wife would know he loved her. He told his killer he loved him too. And then he bowed his head and accepted the only fate that men like him ever receive. That's the real story of Cosa Nostra. Not the glory, not the power, not the money. The end. It always comes. And the only choice you get is how you face it. If you found this story fascinating, hit subscribe. We drop a new mob documentary every week. Drop a comment below and tell us, what Mafia figure should we cover next?